So, a couple of weeks back, I was having a conversation with my friend about the general state of Man vs. Steel in TDX. Said friend kinda plays TDX but is not really into it, so I really wanted to know his perspective as more of an outsider, somebody who's not really a tryhard. And yes, there are some common aspects that we can all agree on, including him, about the grind, about the pacing, about the balancing. But he did mention one thing which really caught my attention, and that is that the event barely feels like a Christmas event in terms of theming. Normally, I'm not one who is all that big on visual themes so long as an event feels fun to play, but as I sat and pondered with this thought, I began to think for a bit. Thinking back to the earlier days of tower defense games, and how whenever such events used to take place, especially in a seasonal manner, they would always take great care to adhere to some kind of traditional, typical theming for the kind of occasion that the event is associated with, such as very spooky enemies for Halloween, or very cheerful, Christmassy enemies for Christmas. But as I look throughout the entirety of the Roblox platform, not just TDX, I keep seeing the fact that more and more of these games seem to be diverging a little bit from this formula and experimenting with newer concepts while loosely associating them with whatever vacation or occasion is there to be celebrated. And so, this is what I am here to talk about. I'm gonna use TDX as my main area of focus. The shift is rather noticeable here and much easier to explain compared to other games. And when it comes to these sorts of events, is it really important to adhere to a seasonal theming, or should there be a higher leeway for experimentation? I want to start off by saying that TDX was always an innovator. They want to push the boundaries of what the tower defense genre is capable of, and always want to baffle players with how much they stray from formula while keeping the game engaging. That being said, a few other games are now following in their footsteps, and so it's important to look back and reflect on this kind of traditional event format, and think of how this shift can impact the development cycle of the game. TDX is no stranger to making seasonal events. In fact, most of their significant events throughout history have been seasonal, associated either with Halloween or Christmas. However, very notable theming shifts have taken place throughout TDX's short lifespan that really make it diverge from how you would have normally perceived a Christmas or a Halloween event back in the day. For example, if we're to look at the contrast between Christmas 23 and Christmas 24, there are quite a few things that are worth pointing out. First off, what ties both of these events together is that they still hold some kind of connection to Christmas. Christmas 23 is by far the most connected to Christmas in this case, where the entire setting is this whimsical map right in front of Santa's factory, where all of the enemies have some kind of connection to the Christmas holiday, and the final boss himself is literally Santa Claus except the Terminator. This event is very iconic, as it showcased a side of TDX which I feel should be experimented way more, where it takes the classical associations you'd have with the tower defense genre, which is this whimsy setting, but then literally peels it away to reveal the edginess and grittiness that lies beyond surface level. I honestly think that this kind of impression sticks long term with players and makes them hold the game up to a certain standard. People still talk about Christmas 23 nowadays. The event itself in terms of gameplay was very simplistic. It was just a linear path where you had to defeat all the enemies, defeat Exo Santa at the end, and then probably play Nightmare Mode and suffer. That event was where we first ever saw a mention of Nightmare Mode in the game, and it was the developer's first attempt at introducing lore in the events. That lore might not hold up so well nowadays, especially with how much better the writing has gotten over time, but it was a very clever attempt at integrating lore into the game and giving some kind of relevance to the gameplay loop by making the players hunt for more details that they would have otherwise missed. What I really want to focus on is the fact that this event, although still quite gritty at its nature, was very faithful towards the theming you'd expect a Christmas event to have. It was whimsy, it was very simplistic, it was fun, and would hold a charm that would be very reminiscent of older tower defense events. However, if we look to the future to next year's Christmas event, you might notice a very radical shift.
It's beginning to look a lot like your strategy sucks!
Christmas 24 is a massive step up from Christmas 23. First off, the lore has become incredibly more relevant with all of the updates, and it culminates here in this very event. We get the introduction of cutscenes that give us more information on the game's main antagonist, as well as an expansive world that focuses on much more than just the urbanized or ruined regions that we're forced to fight in. The event still holds pretty close to the previous years, but it also slightly expands on this topic with the wacky snow mafia, which I absolutely still love the concept of, as well as introducing a lot more of the militarized enemies that Dr. Xenon spams at us later, and even bringing back some familiar faces, while also introducing some new ones. The first part of the event, at the very least, feels like it still carries a very strong association with Christmas. It feels almost like a perfect sequel, where you take what was already there, but expand it in a very unique way which keeps it engaging. The Part 1 map has multi-lane, which was already kind of innovative for the game at the time. It also presents the Snow Mafia, which works in tandem very well with the Christmas enemies new and old, and introduces a new boss which still holds close to the celebration of Christmas. First it was Santa, now it's a gingerbread man with some of the most kick-ass soundtrack I've ever heard. What's important here is how the game managed to not fully diverge from the Christmas spirit, but diverge in such a way in which the event feels unique in its own right, and it's still quite memorable nowadays, even though I don't see people playing the mode as much. And that's because of what came next in Christmas Part 2. Christmas Part 2. I think I could make an entire video as to why this event was able to carry TDX even further than it originally planned to. This event is another instance of no path fighting, which, as we know, TDX innovated this sort of format. Except this time, the Christmas theming is almost not present. This time we're focusing way more on Xenon's wrath towards the GDA, as well as Frosty's faction. Here, rather than focusing on the whimsy, joyful looking enemies that are coming to destroy us with Christmas spirit, we're focusing on an ice army that is back for revenge after so long. And this is where I'd like to say that the event transitions from being a Christmas event to being a winter event. Sure, there are Christmas enemies every now and then, but the matter of fact is that the event doesn't really feel like a Christmas event anymore, but rather a winter invasion. Or a frosty invasion, so to speak. This is where my main point of this video comes along, where these events, organized in such a serious period, come at a sort of crossroads, and rather than turning left, they ask themselves the following question. Do they need to adhere to some kind of holiday theming? Or is it okay for them to just adhere to the seasonal theming? Keep it in track for winter. Perhaps a look at this year's Christmas event will make the question easier to answer. The 2025 Christmas event is the Man vs. Steel event that we currently have going on, which is basically a giant Man vs. Machine TF2 style game mode implemented into TDX. This event revolves around robots made by Forge Industries turning against us, and we have to defend against them at our helicopter point. This event is kind of similar to Christmas 2024, because it once again features the no path format and has enemy robots attacking us. A loose association, but I feel like I still have to mention it. However, the main difference here is that there is barely any sort of winter theming present in this event outside of the lobby. Like, sure, we are somewhere at the North Pole, but there's barely any mention of any ice-themed enemies, any Christmas-themed enemies, or any sort of joyous sensation throughout the gameplay. We do not count the lobby because that is outside of the game. So then we're stuck at this very stark contrast, which really makes you question whether this event really is worthy of the title of Christmas event. After all, if it barely adheres to the theme of Christmas, can it really be considered a Christmas event? And this is where the issue of theming comes in. Because if we stray so far from what makes a Christmas event, then is it even worth making events revolving around Christmas anymore? The same question can be asked for Halloween, because the contrast between The Awakening and Halloween 2025 Shattered Moon is very compelling. It almost feels like a reverse contrast, where the edginess from before was downtuned into a very stereotypical Halloweeny aspect. However, people did not find it as fun because of the stale gameplay loop, and the fact that it was a very underwhelming update compared to what came before it. In my personal opinion, I have always believed that seasonal events inherently are not bad, but it always felt to me like developers were very constrained with what they are able to do in such a short time frame of either the winter, fall breaks, or even summer breaks, because that's also a season. And as such, in order to make room for experimentation, I don't believe that all seasonal events necessarily need to adhere to some kind of celebrational theming. After all, this makes the format feel very saturated, and eventually players no longer feel as excited or as engaged by it. This is what I appreciate about TDX. Like I said, they are innovators, and they always find some kind of way to push through in order to make each event feel more unique than the last. But by that logic, is it really still necessary to make seasonal events tied to a celebration rather than having them being tied to a whole season? Like, why not just change Christmas events to winter events? Or Halloween events to fall events? And then any other seasonal event, just have it associated with the whole season so that it can potentially last longer, have a much more expansive room for theming, as well as provide a much more engaging loop of gameplay rather than being constrained to a very basic idea. And to that I say, not really. After all, it is very cool to have an event which sticks very close to its celebration roots, but at the end of the day, it is always better to see innovations in terms of gameplay, atmosphere, the grind loop, all of the technical aspects. I personally believe that the issue is far more nuanced than events not being seasonal, or events lasting throughout the entire seasonal period, or just theming in general. I believe that the core issue lies at the fact that developers always need to strike a comfortable balance between what theming they're trying to stick to, what vision they originally had, and how they're going to please the player base. Like I said, I've personally never been too zealous over theming, but I can understand why people would be. They've grown up with this whimsical atmosphere that predecessing games have shown. They are used to a holiday event being associated with said holiday, and to an extent, yes, that is important. That is what preserves the spirit of the game going, especially in seasonal events such as these. However, I don't believe there is anything wrong with stepping beyond the boundaries of these celebrations, so long as the steps taken outside of the boundaries are intuitive, innovative, and overall very fun to play. Christmas 2024 is a perfect example of this. It still holds some tie to Christmas, while at the same time innovating the gameplay loop and mechanics in ways in which have still remained memorable up to this day. This is where I believe Christmas 25 falls a little short. There is not much innovation compared to the previous years, and there is also not too big of a Christmas theming outside of the lobby, which in turn causes the event to be a lot less memorable. This isn't really a question of theme. It's a question of how theming is used. Any theming can be a good idea for an event, so long as the event itself has a very fun and engaging gameplay loop. Even The Awakening versus Shattered Moon. One event clearly is inclined more towards traditional Halloween than the other, but people will always remember the latter because the gameplay was really fun compared to Shattered Moon. Experimenting and expanding on concepts is always going to be the main root of game development and what makes each game more fun to play than the last. And this is what developers should focus more on. Sure, sticking to themes is important, but as TDX is trying to do, they need to slowly expand a little bit on the concepts while remembering to stay true to their nature. It is my personal opinion that Man vs. Steel was also a radical shift from what we were used to in terms of Christmas events, and as such this is why neither the theming nor the gameplay landed properly outside of all the other negative factors that we all know about, and I believe that this is a very good lesson to developers in terms of what constitutes a Christmas event or any event in general. Yes, any sort of theming is important, celebrational or not, but what it's always going to come down to is how the gameplay loop works, and that is what keeps an event memorable. But what do you guys think? Do you think that events should adhere more towards some kind of seasonal celebration? Do you think that they should just cover entire seasons without the constraints of celebrations? Keep this celebrational aspect as more of a luxury token, or have it be an industry standard? I'm really curious what you guys think about this issue, because it's such a niche thing, which I feel is actually a little more relevant than people give it credit for. Probably not in the aspect of how the game develops in the future, but it is definitely worth thinking about when considering how future events are gonna look like based on the sort of directions developers choose to take. But anyways, this was a short video I've wanted to make ever since Man vs. Steel came out. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.
Pizza!